Good evening. I've just finished reading Superpowered Year 1 by Drew Hayes. So I decided to try this book since one of the main characters was referenced in the previous book I read, Corpies. One of the characters is like the main character's son from that book. So I mentioned in my previous review that in this universe, there are essentially, I guess, three categories of people. There are regular humans, then there are two types of people who have powers of some kind. So one group are referred to as supers. They're the people who have powers and also the ability to control what they can do. And powards, which are the people who have abilities but lack the capacity to control, like how it's used when it activates and things like that. So the five main characters of this book are the first experimental test subjects of a procedure that was developed to turn powers into supers, which basically just means giving them the ability to control their abilities. Only this is like a really big deal because no one has ever been able to do this before, and generally speaking, people consider it to be impossible. But these five students are accepted into this program and then also receive the chance to attend one of the hero certification programs, which are run at various campuses across the country. So in this case, they're attending Landers in California. So they're essentially trying out college life and getting to know like their own abilities, their own limitations, and exploring like what they might be able to become now that they have the ability to control their powers. Like this means a lot more, I think, for some of them than others, since for some of these characters, like even going to a regular school is something that they couldn't do before. So the five characters are as follows. Nick, his ability is, I guess, the power to affect luck, like good luck, bad luck, and, kind of being able to influence it. So that was pretty problematic for him when he had no control over it, since you had a lot of really unexpected things in your life, like you couldn't really rely on stuff, and it could cause accidents as well as strokes of unusual good fortune. Then Alice, whose ability is to fly, like she used to float whenever she got happy, which was pretty hazardous for her, and I think it explains a lot about her initial character, since she had to kind of learn to not feel very strong emotions, and especially not to get especially happy for fear of like floating off and possibly doing herself serious damage falling from somewhere high. Then we have Mary, who is a really powerful telepath. Like before she acquired the ability to like turn on and off her telepathy, she actually spent many years living by herself out in the woods in order to try to minimize the noise of listening to other people's minds. And Herschel, I guess he's the son of the character, like main character from Corpies. He is technically two people, like Herschel and Roy. Like Roy is kind of like the version of him that actually has the superpowers, like being really strong, really durable, etc., etc. And so I guess you could technically say Herschel's ability is the ability to turn into Roy. Then finally we have Vince. So I guess Vince is the one, actually he's the only one that I actually really like, but also the one that it's making some of the biggest differences for, because he lived on the streets for quite a while since he had to keep moving. Like his ability is to absorb energy, and he's really, really powerful. So like he was always afraid of causing like major damage. Like he can, drain all the electricity from an entire city and then release it, so it could cause like, pretty serious disasters that could hurt a great many people. So this story is basically their first year in the HCP program, and there's, part of this is learning about being a super, part of it is learning about college life in general, and part of it is trying to keep their secret. Like they don't want other students to find out that they used to be powered. So let's see. Well, I mean, I guess I do appreciate that these five characters managed to pull together into a somewhat decent group of friends and a somewhat decent team. Like, I generally like stories where people are able to pull together that way, and like that is something that I think uh, came out fairly well. Unfortunately, I guess there are so many things that I dislike that it's a little hard to pick just one. So I'm going to mention two things. So first, there's a pretty large focus on somewhat stereotypical college life themes. It spends a lot of time on characters' romantic relationships and dating and going to parties with lots of alcohol and I wasn't interested in that stuff when I was in college, and I'm not any more interested in it now. So reading about it was a little bit boring because of how much wordage it took up, I guess. And I didn't like a lot of the relationships, so hearing about it is not particularly interesting. But yeah, I guess it would depend on what kind of person you are. Maybe you're someone who likes reading about that kind of stuff. So something else that really stood out to me though that I don't like is a little bit harder to quantify. I think like as I was reading this book, I kept coming like there's little nuances in the language and in the way like things that some of the characters say where it seems to think that like it makes the assumption that everyone who doesn't have powers must automatically really want superpowers and that everyone who doesn't have powers must be fiercely jealous of everyone with superpowers. And I think I was just kind of ticked off by this point of view, and the story also doesn't take any steps to express differently, but it kept reminding me of a talk that I heard really recently where someone was talking about disability and how a common misconception that a lot of people without disabilities have is that everyone with a disability must really want it to be like quote unquote fixed. And I'm not saying that there aren't people who would like that, and I'm not saying that not having a disability isn't a good thing necessarily, but as someone with a disability, I can honestly say that it's not something I spend much time thinking about. It is not a major priority, and suddenly not having my disability is not something that would be like a suddenly incredibly wonderful best thing I could ever get. Like I just found it kind of irritating that it seems to think you require superpowers to be special and that somehow superpowers make a person better than people without it. Like I severely disapprove of this point of view, and the story didn't really some stories I think acknowledge that that is a problematic thing, but this story seems to think that it's a perfectly justified and normal thing that all people would agree with. So I don't know, I suppose I would just have to agree to disagree with, I don't know if it's the author's point of view or just something that they haven't yet addressed in the story. On the other hand, I guess I will probably read more of this series just because I do like Vince quite a bit and would like to know what happens to him.